name's Evan Torner, and I already kind of got the connections made for you by Chell, but I want to emphasize also I'm the secretary of the Playable Theater Project, which is, again, trying to channel that delicious high culture money into our low culture role-playing projects. And it's difficult because theater and opera are recognized as real art, and ours is represented as not real art. So one of the research questions motivating this is, again, looking at RPG authorship. How do we appraise patterns of LARP design authorship against the backdrop of broader play and design communities? And this question of authorship is very important. With authors comes institutional support. When people see your work as legitimate, then money flows to you, and then you get recognition. And that's not always a good thing. Actually, I think money is often poisonous. It will poison whole projects. But in some cases, when you're trying to get more ambitious, say, projects with 5-figure budgets on it, it needs to be intelligible to these high cultural institutions. And today I'm going to highlight, again, Jeppe and Maria Bergmann-Hamming's work is something quite remarkable in terms of promoting high culture through our low culture medium in a way that I think even enhances and explodes the boundaries of that high culture. And also, you know, think about your own legacies. So we have so many great designers, even just sitting in the room today. You know, don't you want people reading your mail, you know, and your emails, you know, 50 years after you're dead, trying to reconstruct how you made this object? That's what I do in my other part of my job, right? In film and in literary studies. So you have to understand that we're cultural creators, and we're participating in a larger, messy story of cultural creation. When I'm looking at sort of the design framework of any piece, right? When we're talking about an author, we can talk about one person. We can talk about a team of authors, say Jeppe and Maria. We can talk about a whole studio or play design. So when I'm talking about author, I'm talking about this very flexible creator object. And you can read Benjamin Christensen's work for a little bit more on that. I like to, though, always in my work show that this is happening, especially with role-playing games, but this can be applied to any games, at the intersection between play culture, which will be, you know, you already have pre-programmed in your audience a specific way to play a game, and often people will have play culture mismatches that will cause friction, as well as play motivation mismatches. You'll have actual play, so people really playing the object is very important, and then the design is playing a part in that. So if we just speak of design, of course, there are other factors in the room, and this is all happening against the backdrop of social and material conditions for play, that you are able to have the free time for it, the energy, and also and the necessary materials to do it. And again, so a lot of Maria and Jeppe's work is very, very material intensive. This is also one of my main teaching tools that I also am publishing now, is the ACIU framework. And this will be one of the rubrics I use to measure even sort of shared author characteristics across these different works of theirs. The affordances are, what does the game let me do? Everything from I get to walk around an empty English countryside to you know, I get to not be me for a while. Really, the affordances can be very basic to very complicated. However, they are balanced by constraints. How does the game limit play? Incentives, what is the player encouraged to do? We know that Erik Fatland said that all game design is just predicting player behavior. So all we're doing is incentivizing player behavior. What is the player encouraged to do? And when we're looking at the core loop, it's again, the repeated activity or the repeated rituals, if we're using that term, of the game. And finally, the uncertainties of the game. What keeps the player in suspense? And I encourage you all to read Greg Kostikian's Uncertainty in Games on that point, right? So I guess where I'm headed is Jeppe and Maria's work specifically balance between periods of ecstatic and intensive engagement with art, both creation and experience, followed by some sort of relaxation or dance or other period of releasing that in a different way and exploring it in a more relaxed symbolic realm. And this pervades all of their joint projects. When we look then at LARP as a literary and musical adaptation, then we know that LARPs are drawing on human experience, and that then there's actually a notion of literary satisfaction where you see loose ends tied up and sort of over the top character motivations finally satisfied in a narrative, which is called kairosis. And of course, then music, dance, and art and others elicit physical responses and can be brought in as design elements. And this is exactly what Jeppe and Maria do. They bring in other well-recognized art forms, music and in the fine arts and theater and opera, into the role-playing space and use them as design elements. And I would say this is actually a difficult and risky endeavor. They make it look easy. It is in fact not. And that's a major point, right? So there they are. So do not share this, but of course they're so cute together. This is messed up. So I'll just say they start as separate authors at the Danish Festival convention, and you can go to alexandria.dk and find not only all this information, but most of the scenarios. And I'm a collaborator on there too, very much a valuable archive. And that's where you find that Maria Hamming is actually the award-winning designer among the two of them. She won the best scenario for Skyggenes or A Play of Shadows in 1998, and then comes along Jeppe as a collaborator. And their joint collaborations you'll see on the, again, weirdly spaced right-hand side is Stormen, Saraband, Deranged, Spellbound, and Encore. For the purposes of this talk, I'm going to focus on Deranged and Encore, but the corpus of all 5 LARPs are worthy of examination, even in this basic intense engagement rest dynamic. So first, we should take a look at Deranged, a very award-winning scenario, which explores the lives of Clara Wieck, Robert Schumann, Felix Mendelssohn, and Johannes Brahms. They're all going through these flashbacks while Robert Schumann is institutionalized. And they have an ingenious mechanism of scene selection in which the leader of Robert Schumann are all on the wall. And you can then pick a scene, pick a lead, and suddenly you're in that, you're flashing back to that time. And connecting, of course, author biography, author pathologies, music, and lyrics together all in one moment. They explicitly say this is sort of the historical musical drama about the boundaries between genius and madness. And I guess it's hard to kind of tell the Warhammer 40K guys, let's go play Robert Schumann's life. But I really think that the game elements here make this history immediately accessible, and Robert Schumann's music, which is ordinarily consumed in a sort of distanced classical music appreciation fashion, can now be made visceral and meaningful, and that you can actually, I dare say, become triggered by Robert Schumann leader. So just from the ACIU perspective, the affordances are that you have modernism at the backdrop here. You can tell the scenes out of order. There's no such thing as a whole person or a whole character here. You can take the interpretation and ambiguity in any direction you need. And the sanatorium also helps by creating a sort of literary musical gateway to the characters' pasts. Now, this is only accomplished, this freedom you get from the kind of modernist ambiguity comes from rigid constraints. You only have very fixed characters and these very fixed scenes, which kind of put you not so much on a railroad, but give you a menu, a very limited menu of items to explore. Now, the thing you generally see players do while playing Deranged is that they choose the scenes that give them sort of composition abilities, and that's what the game feels like. You have all this music on the wall of a sanatorium, and you yourself are arranging it physically, and that's producing role-playing effects. So the kind of mad creation that we would see in Schumann's work is incorporated into the physicality and the role-playing activities of the game. one of the uncertainties of the game is which scenes will be chosen, what will be the outcomes, the narrative outcomes, and of course, what does it all mean, what we call, semiotic uncertainty. I'm going to move to a very, very cool LARP for the last 5 minutes or so, Encore 2022. There's Ross Bolding there in concert. Encore it was actually created in 2021 and then and debuted in Copenhagen at Black Box Festival, but then was an entry that won the audience award at Festival in Denmark, created by Jeppe and Maria, as well as Ross Bolding. This is a combination of 11 different operas, 50 characters, 11 different operas in the same space. They call it opera punk. And they actually give you costumes when you're there. You have this whole array of costumes you could try on. And so you've smashed up Die Walküre, Aida, Carmen, La Traviata, Nabucco, Turandot, and so on and so forth. They're all in the same space. And now, how does that work? Well, they all kind of have their own internal stories, and then there are these dance breaks. Again, absolutely maddening, expressive, intensive engagement with the opera plot lines. And the genius here, of course, is you have the relationship maps, and the opera explains to you. This places you, in a bodily relationship with opera. You can no longer be ambivalent about opera and be like, I'm not really an opera fan. Well, of course you are. Come on, you have been Carmen, the passionate dancer, right? So it distills the high art to its elemental forms, gives you a place for rapid engagement, and then there's a dance party in between all the different acts. And what I'd like to say is during the dance party, you still are in character, but just in a sort of metaphorical, symbolic sense, which can also be seen in Sarabande and some of their other works, where they just allow you to interpret your character differently through physical actions. So again, you've got these small groups, and there's this loud music that makes you feel like a decadent party. And the act structure, again, your play is not random. It is very rigorously structured, and you have very distinct decision trees and outcomes. When people complain about this game, it's about those. that they weren't as free as possible. And again, by Act 3, then you're allowed to kill each other, and that's fun. Your incentives are to yell dramatic shit at the top of your lungs at each other in between dance sequences, and they have specific mechanics that the more you say something really loudly at each other, the more true it becomes. And again, we're asking the question: well, how might these operas be changed in this new interpretation? How might these operas collide? Who will die? Who will live? And in the actual article that I'm producing on this, I will incorporate Sarabande because it's a crucial early work informing this style. But that then we're also looking at the things that allow this play to happen. So one of them is the herd competence, that you have a very experienced set of Nordic players that are now ripe to play this kind of game. And I'm really interested to see how it works with people who are not as competent, because I'd like to bring it to the States. In addition, just trying to connect the individual design motifs in the game with the festival scene and their authorship to a larger play and play culture, because I think it's important that when we're writing the histories of some of our community's most amazing designers, that we also say they come from somewhere and they're in dialogue with other people. And then finally, that literary adaptations are themselves adaptations, and there is an embrace of the high arts within this sort of low art of role play. And with that, I'm just going to say thank you so much.